There we go. Okay, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, and before we turn the time over to Kaihensi for our thought or prayer, we'd like to take the opportunity to welcome our newest Planning Commissioner, Thomas Hunt. So Thomas, I really don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you'll take just a few minutes and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Not a problem. I'm used to being put on the spot, so it's not a problem at all. I'm Thomas Hunt. I live a little bit northwest of the Dairy Queen there on Parish Lane. I grew up in West Bountiful and moved here to Centerville about 6 years ago. I'm married. I've got 3 little girls, a 6-year-old, a soon-to-be 4-year-old, and about a 3-month-old. So life at home is full of laughs and giggles and the occasional scream, but we're doing good. So the little one's starting to sleep a little bit better at night, so I'm not as sleep deprived as I have been. So I work up in Riverdale. Actually, I'm a civil engineer. It's a company called Reeve and Associates. I've been with them for almost 8 years now. I really enjoy it. But I'm just here to hope that I can help the community and give my input and work together to make Centerville better, I hope. So.
Well, Thomas, we are delighted to have you.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
All right, now heading back to say something about, not yet, because she's still here for a bit. Good. She's smiling at me. Okay, now we'll turn it over for our prayer thought to Commissioner Hincy.
Okay, I'd like to do both. So I'd like to share a thought by Mike Huckabee, so former governor of Arkansas and also an ordained Baptist minister. He said prayer is important, not just as some kind of metaphysical exercise, but I think it's a way to refresh one's own mind and motive. If you're praying, you're really looking beyond your own personal thoughts and the pressures that are around you. And honestly, when I began as a commissioner, the Pledge of Allegiance and the prayer was not expected. I didn't realize that was something that we would do. But if we're praying to look for inspiration beyond us and to come together to help this community, I think it's a great thing. And then I'd like to offer a prayer. Father, which art in heaven, we bow our heads this evening and give thee thanks for this opportunity we have to serve this community. We ask that we might be able to work and collaborate together, communicate together to understand issues and alternatives and come to solutions that will improve and better the community and serve the community. And these blessings we ask thee for in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Okay, moving to our first item on the agenda, we're being asked to consider the final subdivision plat for Legacy Lands, which is a 5-lot commercial subdivision located at 1243 North, 1300 West. We'll turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Heyman. I'll introduce this project for you. This is a subdivision. I noticed my misspell in the title. It's a subdivision. So I'm just confessing that to err up front in the report. But it's a final
just so
subdivision.
Kevin won't say anything. Right?
It's a final subdivision that's coming before you. You're probably a little bit familiar with it. It's Legacy Lands. Mr. Cook has represented Mr. Smith in looking at subdividing their industrial property. I've got the zoning map up here just to give you some background of what's advanced since your preliminary review. If you recall, there's a corner piece of property, and you can see it on the zoning map. It's labeled IH, and the property surrounding it to the south and to the west is the subject land to be subdivided. It was interesting just going through, and if you recall, this corner piece wasn't involved in the subdivision. It was a remainder as a separate parcel, so it's not really a remainder, but it was a separate parcel not incorporated in. And Mr. Cook and Mr. Smith have been able to negotiate with the property owner, and there are offers to incorporate that into the subdivision. And so there is a change from your preliminary to add that corner lot into the subdivision. We didn't think it was a significant change affecting layouts or anything that would cause of concern to go back to preliminary and readdress some matters. In fact, we looked at it in the past discussions with the commission. It's too bad that it wasn't incorporated in the subdivision. What's unique about it is it's labeled IH. And so that was an interesting thing in the background research for the report. Is the subject property is Centerville Shorelands Commerce Park. So we have two different zonings. And as you incorporate that piece of property into the lot, it will create some divisions into lots, and now you'll have properties that don't have the same zoning. And so that introduces a problem with the typical zoning. You want the parcels to have the same zoning so that you have the same uses, the same setbacks, same regulations to occur. It was kind of surprising to staff that it was in the IH zone, because there was a substantial effort in 2009, 2010, I'm forgetting. This was Shorelands Commerce Park was a brand new business park concept, and the entire area was intended to be rezoned as Shorelands Commerce Park. So I dug through the draft copy of the enabling ordinance that I have on files, and the elements that took place for the rezone was twofold. The first element, there were some land serial numbers that were listed. There was also a map attached with it. And those two elements, it was either or. And so the land serial number is missing on this IH parcel from that original rezone, but it is included in the exhibit map of the original enabling ordinance for the SCP zone. So in discussion with Lisa, we believe that we can send in a memo of correction, or an affidavit of correction to the city recorder to go back and verify that enabling or that ordinance that changed the zone indeed was signed and correct. It'd be a correction to the IH zone. At the same time, what's evolved out of state law is you also have to notify property owners when you're rezoning their property. And so we're not sure if the property owner existing or if the developer and applicant absorbing it first were aware of it, and second, are they comfortable or do they contest that should be the place? Because I think if a landowner contests it, then we may look at a different pattern to manage the issue. But if the owners and interested parties understand what happened back then and are okay with it, then we would send in that correction to the city recorder. So that's something I think the applicant can address where the status of that is. Also, in looking at the submittal, one of the areas of concern of the submittal is the wetlands to the west of the property. They're shown on some construction drawings, but the wetlands have not been mitigated. And so at this point, if you recall in the preliminary discussion, there was a choice to either note the location of the wetlands on the subdivision plat or mitigate those wetlands. They're choosing to move forward with the subdivision, and mitigation will either never happen or something they could petition the Army Corps later to remove it and amend the plat. But that's important to make sure that the wetlands are shown on the platted area so that anybody is acquiring that property is disclosed that there's wetlands on it. The other thing we want to make sure is that the easement area is that they're planned for common easement for access is not encumbering over the wetlands also. So that was just an item, I think, clarification on their plans that need to take place. As you see in your report, I tried to highlight the preliminary approval. We do indicate that there are some partial completes and things that need to be done to ensure that the title and the signatures of owners are correct for the subdivision plat for final. At this point, I've recommended approval in spite of those shortcomings, because when you're looking at title reports and other documents, they have to be properly dated, 30 days within recording. The matter that's really of concern is we're adding a piece of property into it, so whoever's owning that, is the sale happening before, and then the title's going to clarify the change of ownership, or is the owner going to be on the dedication plat for that corner lot? So we need to tie up some of those matters, but we didn't believe at our level that it was significant enough to recommend any tabling. If we cover conditions to cover it, but of course that's the commission's call at this point. But for us, we're recommending that you consider the recommendation of approval to the city council with those specific conditions that we've outlined in the report.
Thank you very much, Corey. Any questions for staff?
Yeah, real quick. So with the addition of that little corner one, just looking at the plans, it didn't change anything then materially, like the location of the street stayed the same?
Correct.
I didn't go back and look up the old one, but.
Yeah, the additional part that you'll see in the change of the construction drawings is they've handled their drainage along their frontages, now incorporating this parcel into it. That'll be continuation of those drainage construction drawings that need to be tightened up. But as far as layout, things of that nature, streets, it was pretty straightforward.
Can you just touch on again how this affects the wetlands? Is it just mentioned in the plat, or have they actually purchased land there?
The land is purchased. It's in private ownership. It's encumbered with, they had a soil study back during the conceptual and preliminary, and it showed a delineation of wetlands. And part of the subdivision process is to identify if you have any wetlands, and then we need to either plat the wetlands on the plat so that future owners know that that's a restricted area for future development, or they sometimes can mitigate those wetlands and apply for mitigation from the Army Corps. So at this point, they're not mitigating it, so it needs to be indicated on the plat.
Which I didn't see as a condition, actually. That's what I was going to bring up.
On the previous or the current?
Let me look at.
I was going to bring that
Leave
up.
that off.
It's not on the condition, so I was going to probably add that.
Yeah, I call it out in the prior part, but I didn't include it in the condition.
Yeah, I saw that. It was.
Apologize.
I appreciate that you called it out, though.
Yeah, we do need to have the wetlands indicated on there. That's important from our standpoint. What would happen after is, if they want to make it usable, they would have to approach the Army Corps to mitigate and remove them from the wetland designation. Then they would come back and amend the plat to remove that.
Can you take 10 seconds and educate me? I've heard Army Corps of Engineer my whole life. Is that federal? Is that state? Who is the Army Corps?
Good question. We have all these language of our own in zoning. Army Corps is a federal regulatory body for wetland regulation.
And petitions happen in a couple of weekends?
If you measure it on every year is 1 week.
Every year, 1 week. All right. Okay.
Probably 4 to 6 months.
And just, again, the wetlands, for benefit of discussion, roughly encompasses that easement area on the far west end of the
Correct.
property.
That's the majority of the.
Not exactly, but pretty close. Right?
Pretty close. There is a great differences between the lands that you'll see developed versus the wetlands, and it's pretty defined.
And it's similar to, like, if you're looking at the PFVH, like right behind that on the zoning map,
Yes,
and then it just kind of keeps going up. from
Correct.
there. Okay.
and the pipeline is the pipelines, the crude oil and high pressure gas run through
Yeah.
that area.
Any other questions for staff? If not, we'll invite the applicant to step forward and speak to this matter. If you'll introduce yourself for us.
Thanks. I'm Jeff Cook. I live at 582 North, 340 East in Centerville. Got Gary Smith with me. He lives on 4th East, about the same north, and his brother Gordon. This must be your son, Gordon. Nephew. Okay, good. Anyway, so, yeah, a couple of things that Corey mentioned. I wasn't aware of the zoning difference, but I'm sure I speak for all of us, we would want it to be the same. So if that could work that way, that would be, seems pretty simple, right?
Have you already acquired that property?
It's under contract. We have not closed. The closing will probably happen Friday, maybe Monday.
Okay, why don't you let us know once you've purchased it? That'll simplify the process.
Yeah, we can do that. So that goes to the second thing. There won't be another signature on the plat. They'll own that within just the next 2 or 3 days. The title company informed me today that they had completed the title search, and a lot of it was old. They had to go into old records that, you know, aren't on the computer, so it took them a little bit. But you know, within the next few days, that will close and be done. The wetlands part of it, you know, we'll make a note on the plat. You know what somebody noticed was that there's an easement back there for petroleum lines. I think the easement's 50 feet, and the wetlands is about 46. So it's, you know, pretty much takes the whole thing. There'll never be a building back there. If we were able to mitigate something, it could be some parking or something, but no structures. So, Corey, what else I don't know what the other questions. So the title policy, yeah, as soon as we close on this, then the title company is prepared to issue a policy on the whole parcel. So we could have that within, you know, probably next week or something. We can get that to you. And well ahead of the planning commission, or the city council. Were there other questions? I can't remember. That about it.
Any other questions for the applicant? Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll take the opportunity to open the public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to this matter to step forward. Seeing no one coming forward, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Any other questions for staff? Further discussion or debate?
I think we just need to figure out what the condition number 8's gonna say.
I would just say the wetland boundary needs to be depicted on the final plat, not just the construction drawings, which is right there in the report.
Yeah. Lisa,
Lisa?
does that
Something like
language
that.
work for you?
Does that work?
Yeah, that works.
Okay. So that'll be condition 8.
I mean, he wrote it out. He just almost.
All right. If seeing no further discussion or debate, the chair will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend approval for the final subdivision plat and plans for the Legacy Lands subdivision with items 1 through 8, 8 being that the wetland boundary should be depicted on the final plat, not just the construction drawings, with the suggested reasons for action A and B as noted in the report.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion or debate? If not, Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
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 All right, motion passes. Thank you very much.
Appreciate Lisa and Cassie, Corey, and all the others that worked with us on this. It's been
Centerville City is blessed with an amazing staff.
incredible.
Yeah.
We can't spell, but we can't spell.
Yeah, well, we can forgive you for that.
Yeah.
All right, moving to the next item on our agenda.
Well, I'm just going to pause on that. I don't think we've ever gotten incredible.
Incredible?
That's a new high.
Let's repeat that.
Take that one.
Put that on that record, Jamie.
Good news, it's
Clip
on
that.
YouTube, so you can just loop it all day long.
I hope we caught it. That's why I repeated it.
It's definitely because I just joined.
There we go.
All right.
We want you to stay, so we paid them to say things like that.
All right.
We have fun here. We really do, Thomas. You'll enjoy us. Okay, item number 2 on our agenda. So next up is a discussion regarding the subdivision ordinance updates. This is chapter 4, the existing conditions inventory. And so I'll turn the time over to Lisa.
Thank you. At your last goal-setting meeting, you noted that you'd like to continue with the subdivision ordinance, so we're bringing you chapter 4. the existing conditions inventory. Currently, your zoning code already has a chapter requiring this inventory. And so we're kind of pulling it out of the zoning code and putting it in the subdivision ordinance because it makes just as much sense in the subdivision ordinance as with any kind of site plan or things like that. And as the DRC, when we were working on this chapter with the consultant, if you compare this with chapter 50 in the zoning code, there's a few additional items, so it's a little more extensive, and we might want to go back and amend chapter 1250, but you'll see a few additional things. So I think in the past we've just kind of gone page by page. For this one, I might want to highlight a couple things and maybe some input that might be helpful from the Planning Commission. But
hey, Lisa, can I ask you a real quick question first? Sorry, on something you said. So this is existing in the zoning code. We're going to copy it to the subdivision, or we're going to pull it out of the zoning code? And
no,
put
I
it
just
in
meant
instead?
we're putting an additional chapter in the subdivision. We're leaving it in the zoning code, but we're mirroring a similar chapter in the subdivision ordinance.
So it'll be in two places, but they're going to kind of treat it slightly different, so there's not a need to make sure that they're always kind of the same, or you wouldn't just reference the one, right? You see what I'm saying, though?
Yes, and we've had this question with a couple things, but since the zoning code is separate from the subdivision ordinance, which is in the municipal code, I am generally repeating things. We've tried to refer, for instance, to the bonding procedures in the zoning code, but you just have to send someone somewhere else. So I think with this, my suggestion is, though, as with a lot of what we're doing in the subdivision ordinance, we could maybe look at the zoning and say, hey, do we want to add some of these additional, like we've added the geotechnical assessment and the inaccuracies and other things like that. So just from what we're doing here, we might want to improve upon in our zoning chapter.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was going to ask then, is as we make amendments in the future and currently here, we probably also need to take a look at the other one and say, do we also mean it there too, right?
Right. And I'm suggesting some changes because I think, in my experience, we're finding some of these issues later in the process than we should. And so the way I've drafted this is that you are going to submit a document that says existing conditions inventory. And it needs to be separate. We don't want this showing on your plat or, you know, combined with other things, because they always say, oh, well, it's here, but I think we need to do a special assessment right off the bat with what's on the property. And it might be really simple for a lot of properties, but I think we really need to know where are those wetlands, not wait till preliminary, or, you know, but the consensus from the Development Review Committee was we don't want to make this costly, okay? Because remember, we're requiring it at conceptual or very early on, and so we're not requiring any engineering with conceptual. That's been our policy, is people should be able to come in and see if their project's workable before they have to spend too much money in engineering. And so the idea here, and that's kind of in the purpose statement and the scope, is most of this information is out there. And we can try and help you find it, but it's out there, and we just want you, developer, to collect it and put it on one sheet. Now, some of it might require some cost, because we do say in here that we want the information graphically overlaid on your property. So we don't want you giving us a big, huge, you know, map of the floodplain, but not helping us understand where that floodplain line is in comparison to your property. So there are some of those requirements. But I think that it would be really helpful. What I find too is, you know, when we say we want all existing utilities shown on your property, we don't always get that up front. So I think this might help get all of that information in one spot, and then we will submit that, you know, to the Planning Commission for your review with the conceptual, and then we may even use it when we do preliminary. But the idea is that we're setting out some of this information, but we're going to require the costly stuff
Later.
with preliminary. And that's where you might want to weigh in. So we've kind of couched it where, give us the soils report if there is one, because we're gonna require the costly one later, or, you know, some other items like that.
Well,
then-
and these are all things they have to show eventually, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just basically putting it into one spot so that they can, so that we are more aware of everything.
I think it will require, I mean, those that have done subdivisions in Centerville, it's gonna require them to do a little bit more work up front, but I think it's gonna help all of us in the process, being more comprehensive in that review of existing conditions before we move forward.
So Lisa, then, in an effort to keep costs down for that conceptual, do we allow like a hand-drawn conceptual? And would we allow some of this stuff to be shown on a hand-drawn type of a situation? I'm thinking
I
about,
would imagine, yes.
I'm thinking about maybe we've got an elderly couple who's got some extra land and they're ready to do something with it, but they want to see what sticks, right? So they do their conceptual, they don't want to spend the money yet to see.
Mm-hmm. That's probably a good question for Corey and Cassie, because I'm pretty much a stickler, and if it's required, it's required, but I think we probably allow some hand-drawn.
I'm not saying necessarily that we need to or that we absolutely should be, but I'm just kind of curious about, you know.
Yeah, I do know with conceptual site plan, it just says a sketch drawing, and so if they want to draw it, they can draw it. So.
Yeah, my experience is, you know, twofold. If you have somebody that's fairly familiar with development, or hired an engineer, or whatever they normally do, conceptual usually comes in at preliminary plus. They have a tendency to, you know, they're hiring in a professional. They don't want the professional doing it 3 times, and so they just go out, do their own assessment on the environment, gamble, put their money in, and the plans are coming in preliminary level or plus. But the good question is you do have a couple that wants to divide a land, and sometimes it is cocktail napkin, and you know, the better ones have a tendency to use Google Earth and draw lines and color it, and what you see is staff is kind of fluid in that, depending on who we're coming in. You know, if you get somebody that's you know, not as versed into the process, at the DRC we're kind of looking at Randy and Kevin and staff to say, okay, we have some corporate knowledge, we need to be aware of this. If there's something that we're unsure of, we may ask them to find somebody or help somebody to get it. But I would say, and this is probably what drives some of staff crazy, because I've had the experience with the DRC, is sometimes we move too fast because we are being a little loose depending on who we're working with. Because to fight someone for a month and a half on something that might be, oh, we already kind of know that information, so we just move it forward rather than just say send it back. And so, you know, it depends. If, you know, I hear the comment, Centerville's the worst city to do business in, but then I hear that Salt Lake City's the worst city, because if there's a person at the counter and they look at your plan, and if it doesn't have the stuff, they just grab everything back and hand it back to you. Our front counter's taking it in, the plans are collecting the check, then 3 hours later somebody's looking at the plan maybe, or the next morning's looking at the plan. It's like, oh, but they're already scheduled on a meeting, so we try to use the meeting on a Monday to get some information in the next week and see if we can make a call whether it's going to make it on an agenda. So I probably drive people nuts because it's 21 days, they've paid their fee, and if it's not really critical, we kind of push it through. But if it's critical, we'll hold it up. So.
Thanks, Corey.
And Lisa sometimes does look at me in those meetings.
So the idea with this is to require it with conceptual, you know, they don't have to do it before, but because it does say prior to any review, but review and approval. So my thought is that with conceptual, you would have the existing conditions inventory, and then it's up to staff to determine if that submittal is complete. But one thing that I would like some input on is currently it says that the ECI has to be submitted with whatever first application they submit. So on a new subdivision, that's going to be the conceptual, but you might have a plat amendment or like a boundary line adjustment or, you know, some other kind of application. So I was trying to think if the ECI was really needed for a plat amendment. And the reason I left it in there is, you know, if it's a recent plat amendment, no, we probably don't, because we could just pull out the old one. But, you know, if it's a plat amendment 20 years later, maybe we do want to confirm where the existing utilities are now and, you know, that kind of thing. So I left it in there, but that is something that we could just say, oh, if you wanted to reduce the burden, you could say it's only required with conceptual, but I'm recommending that we require it with any first submittal, regardless of what kind of subdivision, amendment, conceptual, boundary line, and then we can use our discretion as to the sufficiency of that. Like maybe Corey would accept the one from a year ago, something like that.
And just for your information, often you're going to see with somebody who's prepared a packet, they'll often include, even though they're kind of moved to preliminary, they usually have an ALTA survey, and that contains a lot of the information right off the bat.
Oh, okay.
And that's what you can incorporate in. But that survey is done by a professional, so there is a cost associated with it.
Okay, so that's just the scope kind of question. And then section 030 talks about, okay, what do we want in this existing conditions inventory? And so we have various categories, but again, the idea is we're just asking them to collect this information from other places. But under the general section, it does say that it has to be prepared separately from the subdivision, in that we want this so that we can read it and understand what's on there. And that we want it on the large sheets so we can read it on the 24 by 36. And then I did put in our standard where we'd like 3 hard copies and 1 electronic so that we can easily convert that for Novus. So then the first section is to talk about streams and floodplains. And this is the one that does say we want that information graphically overlaid on the property, meaning, you know, show us where on your property the stream is if you have a stream, or where that floodplain line is on your property. So any questions or changes on page 1?
I had 2 minor things. Sorry, I'm getting over something and I'm a little croaky today. We define ECI twice, once in .10 and once again in 020.
020, let's see. Oh, great, okay.
So I think we only need to define it the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And then because we refer to ECI throughout the entire document rather than existing conditions inventory, which is the title of the chapter, I question whether we can take the subheading on 030 and instead of calling it existing conditions inventory requirements, just call it ECI requirements. I don't have a strong preference there, but since we refer everywhere else to ECI, it seems like that's sort of a logical thing given that the chapter title is the full name.
Yeah,
But
that's interesting, because I was just thinking about whether somebody would search existing conditions or ECI, because when I was trying to look it up in the zoning code, I looked up existing conditions, but,
It'll pull up under the chapter.
Yeah,
and
true.
under
Okay.
O&O. I don't know. I don't feel strongly about that one, Lisa, but
Okay.
Lisa, you probably mentioned this several times, but what is CMC?
So CMC is our Centerville Municipal Code citation.
Okay,
And
so
then-
it doesn't need,
And then the Centerville zoning code, we refer to as CZC. And in both those documents, those are defined in the preface.
okay, thank you.
And I don't know if we want to add it to our definitions chapter. We could certainly do that if somebody wanted to look it up. Okay, so we asked for streams and floodplains, and then the next thing is what we want to know about steep slopes. And so that, you know, this depends on what kind of development they can do, or any property over 30% is considered undevelopable in Centerville. Certainly not in other places, but. Then the sensitive soils and groundwater, the original draft from our consultant said that it shall show sensitive soils as identified on any soil survey prepared for a government body. And I wasn't quite sure what that was, so I just reduced it to identified on any existing soil survey for the subject property. So it's not really asking for a lot if they haven't done a soil study yet. But what we're saying is if you have, because you're worried about something or we know about something, then provide it to us. So I don't know if anybody else has any insight on some kind of soil study for a specific government body.
I think your counties have, is it the county that generates the, they're pretty old data, but they have soil surveys on record and in old publications that are pretty broad and label the different types of soils.
So would we want to say including any county, you know, including any Davis County information?
You could, if you just want to be able to flag something like the high shrink swell potentials, because they're listed, but they're so, the polygons and the, what do you call it, the ratios are not really very property specific. They're pretty broad-based labeling.
Yeah, it's all listed online, and it's very vague on where everything is. It's very general. It's more of just to give you an idea of, we found this type of soil in this area, and it can be listed on here.
So what online resources there, is that at the county? Or?
I think NRCS can have some data too. I don't know if I'd limit it to county, make them do their homework.
Including but not limited to. Because if we just say any existing and they have no idea if there are, it's kind of nice to say, hey, there's definitely resources at Davis County or this NRCS. Is that an online resource?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll look that up.
And there's no requirements for like our hillside overlay to, are there requirements to get those soil
Yes, so if
samples?
you're in the hillside,
That would be the special
that's
protection area?
addressed later. Proposed subdivisions within the hillside overlay zone shall be required to provide the geologic conditions report in CZ's,
Oh,
and
there it
then we
is,
do
right there.
refer to the zoning
Okay.
code requirement.
Okay, cool.
And that's
So it
on
is addressed there.
Page 3, yeah, that's in
Geotechnical.
Geotechnical.
Okay, cool, thanks.
And we do require the special protection area, so they do have to tell us if it's in the hillside area, et cetera, so.
Perfect.
Okay, and then we want to know the wetlands. So yeah, if the engineers have any suggestions on this chapter, we'll certainly take it. But it does say the wetlands shall be shown by a line denoting the boundaries, so that we wouldn't have this situation because we'd already know exactly where that line is. Not at final, but up front, we would know where that line is.
So I think the only thing to be cautious with something like this, just in my experience, is the accuracy of the document that we're going to get. Without paying a lot of money to gather this information, most of it's going to be like documents for FEMA or from whoever that's going to be overlaying that, where this is approximately where this boundary is, or this is approximately what that slope is. So as long as we know in our mind that, you know, if the next time we see it and they've done that final survey and actually delineated exactly where the wetland is, and it's changed from what we saw before, we realize that, well, that was just a conceptual, and so this is, I mean, to do all of this stuff is very expensive if it's done 100% accurately. And I don't think that's the intent of this, just as long as we know that this is where the approximate boundary line is.
Well, maybe that's a good suggestion, because on this wetlands, maybe we should note that we want the actual line with preliminary, that we just want the basics at this level, because I don't want them to assume, because they gave us the estimated line, that they don't have to give us the actual line later. So,
Yeah, I don't know how you'd couch it, but any existing studies on wetlands and information, because it's going to be broad and not site-specific. And there's opportunities when you actually do the delineation to figure out where the wetlands are. So I agree, it should be kind of done by existing resources. And then
Right.
Right. And I think we do have to recognize exactly what Thomas said, that these are very broad boundaries, that soils can be totally different than what a soils report by the NRCS is gonna represent for one parcel.
Right.
I mean, sometimes you dig a hole 10 feet from another hole and the soil's way
Right.
different, so it's, I mean, I think this is a great idea, just so we know what land may have and what the developer, just so they know what they may face as far as developing it, but we just need to make sure that we realize it's going to be very broad and basic. But include this if there is anything, but it just might not be exact.
okay. And then I also
Lisa?
had a question, so maybe the idea is to reduce the language here on the wetland delineation boundary line, you know, and require that with preliminary. But then I also had a question about, it does say here, if wetlands are present, a wetlands assessment shall be submitted, okay, prior to the preliminary. So what is the wetlands assessment and how much does that cost?
That's a pretty expensive
Okay,
at that point in time.
so
And
that,
they'll go out and hire somebody to identify what's there. See if they're, and again, that can be pretty expensive, because you can infer things, but you also will sometimes do the test of water and look at the drainage and see if it's actually a wetland. And that takes some effort to delineate.
so
if
do we
it's actually a
always
wetland.
require that? If property has wetlands on it, do we always require the assessment?
At the
Okay,
preliminary,
at
yes.
preliminary, okay, then that's good. So. we'll
This just
make
gives us an
reference.
idea of, do we need to flag that, keep that in mind?
Yeah, okay.
So question on that, though, we're kind of, especially at the conceptual stage, we're counting on the applicant to kind of do their best with some of this, and maybe the information they're getting from the NRCS is broad and general. So if wetlands may be present, because maybe we look at it and say, you know what, are we sure those wetlands don't come over into this property a little bit? Because the owner is going to say, the applicant, their incentive is to say, oh, no, there's no wetlands here, they're over there. But we're like, oh, are you sure? I don't know. I'm just trying to think about,
But wouldn't that come up eventually anyway? I mean, this is more just,
well, I know, but
Well, and that's what I think is staff's role in, this is just trying to help us get the information we need to analyze and, yeah, and say, hey, we don't, you know, and so at preliminary, we can say, we'd like you to actually, you know, because at preliminary, we're gonna say, show us the line.
so, okay, so then that's where, I'm just thinking about number 3 there under wetlands. If wetlands are present, that absolute are present instead of a more broad maybe present, we're gonna say for preliminary, show us where they are.
And that's your assessment, yep.
Okay, that's fine. I don't wanna just trust 100% that the applicant's always gonna give us the right information. They're gonna put the wetlands line outside of their property line, and we're gonna say, okay, then there's no assessment required, when in reality, maybe the line is on the property, right? Because that's
Yeah,
up
I
to staff
mean-
then to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a risk in there, because somebody could just come in and say, you know, wetlands are not present. And staff does a little bit of due diligence in saying, okay, that up on the hillside, probably not a wetland.
Yeah.
You know, down in the flats, we kind of know where the wetlands sit.
Yeah.
But there's always some risk that a small section of property is wetlands, and it's not been categorized as jurisdictional wetlands, and I won't say that it's caught. I mean, we'd like to catch it, but if it's small enough, it's not necessarily going to be caught.
so my question is this, I mean, this ECI is not intended to take place of what the requirements are after this. So I feel like this ECI is just an additional thing that helps you as staff to put everything, to sort of organize things a little bit better. And then all of those same requirements will have to be met later on down the road, right?
Yes.
So hypothetically, if there's a wetland, even if they're like, oh, there's no wetland, then we're gonna see the wetland eventually, right? Like, so one way or another, it's gonna be addressed. Hopefully they would be upfront about it, and hopefully they would realize, like, this will help me long term.
Yeah, and think about it. We had where the Legacy Theater is, the Megaplex. Everybody in from their perspective said there's wetlands present here. And if you look at the plant types, there's wetlands present. And they came in with the initial development, and we asked wetlands present. What they actually did when they did the wetland assessment is they discovered that the ditches was artificially created. So they went in with the RDA, fixed the drainage ditches with it, and it sat, because you have a year from preliminary to look at it. It sat long enough that they were able to identify that they were not true wetlands, and then could move forward with the development. So, there's some things that are going to happen in between. If they find wetlands, what's the extent? Do they want to mitigate it? Do they want to keep it? Those are questions to be asked.
But I think that goes back, that's a good point there, because it kind of touches on a conversation that we've had on and off for a year now about public hearings and not public hearings at different stages and whatnot. And not to say that a public hearing would always identify wetlands, but it at least gives a chance to have somebody say, I think there's wetlands over there.
Yes, that's another.
And we do have the public hearing.
Why we want the public
conceptual.
hearings up front and not at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so the next section is on trees and shrubs, and I guess this is a question for Corey, because I want whatever's in here, if it's too much and you don't want to enforce it, then let's just take it out. So this might be one of those where we're saying, I think we do want to see the trees, but maybe you say, look, any tree bigger than X, or.
Yeah, this is a hard one in the sense of this would, somebody's got to go out and try to estimate how big it is, even if it's not a professional, and try to identify. You can kind of get a general stands of trees that landscape architects, and it'll just kind of bubble it. But it's a little bit of a hard one for me in the sense of, are we really to that point? We don't really have a strong landscape preservation in our ordinances. I'm not saying we should or shouldn't. The closest that we have is in the hillside. We don't want somebody going up on the hillside and just grading out an acre of property. What you're going to develop, the rest of it maintain. What you disturb, you restore, is what we say on the hillside. But we don't really say, hey, we want to preserve all those trees. We're not, we have public space trees that we worry about, but we don't really have a plan for private trees. Now, private trees on land can count towards tree counts in commercial development or industrial development and so forth. So I'm always a little bit loose on the trees and shrubs, because it's like, okay, thanks. You'll scrape it out for the road anyway.
Yeah.
So, but I'll give you one case and scenario. Chapel Ridge, Lund Lane above. There's a big tree in that area, and there was a nest in that area, and there's a raptor nest.
Oh, wow.
And so we caught that with the existing conditions inventory, the loose one that the required, and they had to contact DWR, and they had to wait till the nest was abandoned from the little ones, and then they could take down the tree.
What are do we have any, as a Tree City USA, do we have any requirements to maintain? Like, if there's a parcel that has so many trees on it, do we have to at least replace that many and add more or whatever? Like, we don't have any kind of
We don't have anything in the zoning and controls. I don't know what the nomination of Tree City USA for Centerville was, because we removed some when we redo streets. So,
I know, it's sad.
and that's where I say, if we were really strong on the preservation, other than the generalized landscaping needs of the hillside, you know, thanks, we know you have some trees there. So an example is Fred Hale's subdivision at Rigby Court.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he identified the trees. Great, because they're all gone.
Mm-hmm.
Because the new alley on the property line took out all of those trees. Now, some of the neighbors were kind of like, well, I like them. They kind of buffered the property to me, and now they're all gone. But it's like,
It's his property.
we identified them, but we
Yeah.
did nothing with
And we
them.
had another issue, someone was putting in a new home and the tree was on one neighbor's property and they were gonna take it down to build the house, but the other neighbor
Okay.
loved it and it was huge and provided shade to half their property. But I think our ordinances do provide in a number of places, they encourage the preservation of the trees. So for instance, in our site grading, it says site design should minimize the removal of mature trees and other existing mature vegetation. But in that case, the way I read the ordinances, there's nothing in there that required the developer to preserve the trees. So we don't have any mandatory preservation of trees, but we do have language that encourages it in a number of places. And so I think I don't mind the idea of having an aerial, you know, with your mature trees, just to know and maybe help them think about preserving them, but that would be it. And so that's where it was sort of my question on the second sentence, which is, you know, every tree has to be delineated by a circumferential line extending to the outer perimeter of the tree, and then the tree varieties and shown. So I think you just basically want to know where are your mature trees, because that's what our ordinance encourages the preservation of.
That's a good point. I don't know if we need every tree to be delineated.
So maybe we say the ECI shall show, I mean, we don't care about the shrubs. Shall show, we do care about the shrubs. We shall show mature trees, and take out stands, mature trees as indicated by a recent aerial photo, at least in the last 12 months. How about that?
That's fine.
Why are we requiring it to be 12 months? I mean, I'm assuming that you're thinking this is you just pull up Google Maps, right? Except that those aren't always 12 months
Yeah.
or less old. Why can't we just say by recent
Most
aerial
recent
photos,
aerial
period?
photo.
By a recent?
A
Right, yeah,
recent.
by recent
Recent?
aerial photos, period.
I was gonna ask that question too, because you can't always guarantee that those Google Google Maps or Earth photos are gonna be
Or
12 months.
within 12 months. And I would hate to have
Okay.
somebody feel like they have to go hire, you know, a drone to get an aerial shot.
So the
Yeah.
ECI shall show mature trees as indicated by recent aerial photo. Are they gonna argue what mature is? I mean, over 10 years, I don't know, but I think that's a good compromise.
You don't have to put mature, you could just put, you could keep it simple how you had it, shrub and tree as indicated by recent aerial photo. That seems the most general.
Don't we have a
They're not
couple of new
required to
certified
do anything,
arborists that could help us with some of
Yeah,
that?
do
Isn't
we-
Bruce and,
No, they're not required.
Do we have the right to
I
tell
don't know.
them what to do with trees?
Yes, we have two, well,
On
I don't know about
their- on their-
arborist,
on their
our
pri-
city
on their
recorder
property,
and,
do they have the-
yeah, our
I thought I heard that Bruce Cox was like a certified arborist or something
He
like
is.
that.
and I think we have somebody on our trails.
Maybe they could weigh in on what's a
Okay, so you
meaningful
want
tree
just
and not a
shrubs and
meaningful
trees
tree.
or trees?
I think from a developer standpoint, if there's a mature tree or shrubbery or something, it would benefit them to try and make their site plan work around that, to keep it there, to beautify their land. And so but at that point, we don't really have any right to tell them they have to keep a tree, I don't think.
Okay.
I know in certain areas, like Flagstaff, you can't, or they throw you in jail. I know there are certain places like that, but I don't think that's the case here, and so.
It
I
does
think we're
seem to
ready to
me
throw
like we're
people in
getting into
jail.
an area that, where it's not required for their development, why would we track that?
Well, because our ordinance does encourage the preservation of trees.
Yeah,
So I think you do want it, it's just, you don't need
just make
quite
it
as much
simple.
detail.
Yeah.
It's just one extra aerial photo, but.
I am concerned about the whole concept. I'm not gonna lie. This whole like, well, it's approximate, it's preliminary, it's do your best, but none of that language is in this, right? There is nothing in this that says do your best is good enough. I mean, the closest that we have is the scope that says most information required for the ECI is readily available and does not require the applicant to conduct original research to address the information requirements of this chapter. although some additional research may be required. I mean, I don't know that I read that and say, oh, okay, well, they're just looking at for me to do my best, right? Even though we're all up here saying, well, that's what we mean by it. I don't know that
No, I think this says you shall show the recent photo. So I think if it's shalls, you are going to do it. But the comment I made is, it's not you're gonna do your best. The comment I made is that most of this stuff is readily available and you need to provide it.
But I think that, go ahead.
I guess, I mean, I look at the wetlands, for example. It says, if wetlands are present, then a wetlands assessment shall be submitted to the city. If I'm like the mom and pop, I look at that and I go, oh my gosh, are wetlands present? I don't know. Do I need to go do a study to find out if wetlands are present, so that if there is one, that I need to submit it? Because I still go back to scope and it says most information required does not require the applicant to conduct original research. I mean, I read that and say, well, okay, most of it probably is available. What about this wetland thing? Do I need to go research? Do I need to hire somebody to find out if I have wetlands present?
Yeah, probably.
Right?
You need to know if you have wetlands.
But at this
You're gonna
ECI
develop.
stage,
But maybe it should be worded differently. I agree with Shaylin a bit that it seems like this is requiring that, when maybe it should say a wetlands assessment will be required prior to preliminary subdivision application.
Yeah, but you can go to NRCS and figure out if we're even close to wetlands, right? And that's, I think, all we're asking is to say,
Right, but that's
Give
not
us
what
an
this is
idea.
saying. It's saying a wetlands assessment, which is
Right, shall be required a
detailed
preliminary.
study.
if wetlands are present, then a wetlands assessment shall be submitted, but
At
only if they're
It's not
present.
required at the ECI, it's required
Right.
at the preliminary, so but it's in the ECI.
But
Like, that one has been bothering me.
But I think that that's what I'm saying, though, is on the ECI, you just need to go to the NRCS or whatever other source you want to use and say, give me a ballpark, are we even close?
I agree with you, but when you say wetlands assessment, that's not going to the NRCS. That is hiring somebody to do a detailed study.
this
Yeah.
is
And
the
I'm
one that-
fine taking 3 out and requiring it as part of preliminary.
I think
it's
that it would
3
be
that's
better to
been bugging
just
me.
make a new sentence in 2 and say, wetlands shall be shown on the ECI. Maybe put a statement in there, check NRCS Yeah. records or county records or
other-
whatever, but take 3 out entirely, because I feel like Shaylin's right. For the person who doesn't do this all the time, they're gonna question if they have
What
to
they have to
hire
do.
someone to do that.
That's the one I zeroed in on when I was talking about my comments, because of all of them, the other ones don't
And I
bother
kind of
me as
feel like
much,
the
but.
trees thing, it needs to be worded a little, I agree, it's just an aerial photo, but are we,
But on the trees one, I think that, yeah, the ECI shall show trees and shrubs. But then, back to the section that Lisa read a few minutes ago, you should, whatever, make an effort to preserve or whatever. It was a should, not a shall, right? But then, at least when the ECI comes in, you can look at it and say, that helps with the DRC or the Planning Commission or whoever else is looking at it to say these are significant or not significant, we care, we don't care, you know, whatever reason it is. You put them on there roughly.
I'm
and
okay
then-
with putting them on there.
and then-
I just wonder if we have language that clearly helps them to understand why and what might be required because of that.
Right, and that's where, you know, it's only a should, not a shall, but then that should plays into, maybe there's some type of conditional use and we're trying to mitigate some situation where like, well, you got these trees here, so, but if we didn't know if there were trees, I guess we're always looking at Google Maps and whatever else. But
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I appreciate I like where you're going with that you're saying this shall be done, this is why with the should statement.
Yeah.
Right.
So show us a bunch of stuff and we'll figure out later what we want to do with it.
Why do we care
Yeah.
about shrubs?
That's what I'm asking. I personally care.
The
I
shrubbery,
think there
the
are
shrubbery
residents in
is very
city
important.
in our city that do care about having an established neighborhood and not just having redevelopment blow everything down for years and years.
Yeah.
I personally care, and I know there are people that do.
I agree.
I totally care too. I think most people would be like, hey, these are some great looking shrubs and trees. If we can get around not ripping them out, of course I mean, who wants to rip out mature shrubs and trees Just more work. on purpose? Right.
I guess I just delineate the difference between a shrub and a tree. A tree, it takes a long time to grow, usually, right? A shrub, dude, I can regrow a
You
shrub.
can
in a
regrow
year.
that fast.
So I am not a big proponent of the Shrub Protection Society, but
The
that's just-
Shrub Protection Society.
Well, trees actually add value to people's property. I mean, I've seen lawsuits over hundreds of thousands of dollars for one tree. shrubbery, I don't know of one. Not to say it doesn't add value or beautify land, but it's,
A pyracantha keeps all the kids cutting your corner.
I would advocate
Smells
for,
so good, actually.
I would-
I love the smell.
if it were me, I would take out shrubs, and I would put in mature trees. And I know that mature is sort of a vague and ambiguous term, but I think that the intent of it is, I mean, not the like one little tree that you planted last year that, you know, a strong wind could knock over. We're talking about,
Especially
Tree
where
trees.
in the end, the owner of the developer gets to decide anyway. We can encourage all we want, but this is not, we don't have jurisdiction over this.
But don't you-
No matter how much we want to keep the mature trees.
Without being an arborist or a botanist or anything myself, don't you think that shrubs occur in certain locations according to certain drainage, soils, all of those things too? So I think having the existence of shrub, I mean, whether you have it say, show shrub and tree, or show tree in an aerial photo, if it's a recent aerial photo, it'll probably show both. So it's not like it's like, ooh, we're not gonna show the shrubs if the aerial tree, like it seems like.
Photoshop them out.
Yeah, are they
Yeah.
gonna Photoshop them out? What are they gonna do? So I feel like you just say shrubs and trees, and it's just like someone saying, yeah, here's the aerial photo recent.
Well, and I mean, I agree with both sides, because this is a preference issue, not a right or wrong. But for me, there's a difference. If we're talking about commercial and industrial development, or a hillside where you don't want to create a lot of soil erosion, the trees and shrubs are an important issue. If you think about a traditional subdivision, though, there are mature trees that add value, and people will desire it, and hopefully developers think about it. But if we start talking about shrubs, I really think that the people who buy homes in a typical subdivision are going to tear everything out except for that mature tree and plant the shrubs and the
That they want.
plantings that they prefer in their design. And so the shrub preservation works if you're looking at shrubs and trees in a commercial industrial development or a planned unit development where you're trying to do something that preserves trees. But in a cookie cutter subdivision, it's all gone and being replaced by the homeowner after you do the subdivision process.
Well, and I'm not necessarily advocating for preserving shrubs, but I do think it does help, like I said, in seeing drainage or seeing, you know, from the, just like the layman's perspective of someone that's going to be doing a subdivision. If they see that there's a bunch of shrubbery in a certain area, that might help them recognize, oh, well, maybe that's,
Yeah, but I'm just
You know
saying,
what I'm saying?
if you're doing a PUD subdivision, if you're doing a cluster subdivision, if you're doing something that has a design to it, that you're preserving a ravine, or you're preserving a riparian, I can't even say it right now, the creek.
Yeah.
If you're doing things like that, the shrub and all of that plantings work really well. But if you're thinking about a cookie cutter subdivision, you know, the occasional mature tree will probably be preserved because it's part of what a developer will sell a little bit of a higher premium lot to. But if you're looking at it from the single family home subdivision, it's likely all going to be gone and replaced.
again, I'm not advocating to keep all shrubs. I just think it's helpful to know where they are.
I think, first of all, we're not paying for the word by the word here, so I think we should leave them both in because somebody might have a different interpretation of what a shrub is versus a tree than another person might have. And so if you leave it in, you're more likely to see a more complete picture of what's in
Doesn't
there.
make it any harder for anyone.
And again, since we're not paying by the word, just leave it in. That's my vote.
I'd agree to that.
it strikes me as a potato issue. They're gonna give us an aerial and it's gonna have stuff on it and it will probably
Exactly.
include shrubs. I still would not include shrubs because I don't think anything in our code requires us to look to shrubs, but I'm,
Well, I think I'll just leave it, but remember those comments when you vote, and you can amend it at that
And if
point.
they have potato plants, I want to see those too.
No potato plant.
The potato plants.
But we are taking this out the second half that
Yeah,
talks
yeah, yeah.
about delineating.
And the 12 months
How
from
large?
date of submittal
Okay.
and all that stuff.
Okay. So the next one, it talked about utility lines, and this one brings up a lot of the issues that we've already talked about, because this is one that we usually don't get necessarily up front, and maybe it's because it does take more work to go figure out exactly where the lines are underground, or are there already maps easily available?
Does the city have a GIS system?
We do, and we have a lot of our infrastructure already available that can be easily accessed, but sewer district provides their own, and so the sewer district will have their own mapping and their own lines that we don't have. But we'll have the storm drain, we'll have the water, but the other utilities that might encumber the property, Rocky Mountain Power or something traversing through, the other one's the high pressure pipeline. We just happen, because those are defined facilities, we know where they're running, but we wouldn't have records of that.
But
So
in
do
the-
we see this information up front, Corey, is it a reasonable request of the applicants in the way we've been using it?
If you're thinking of somebody who does development, I think it's reasonable because they're already that far ahead before they're even coming to us. But if you're talking about somebody retiring in a piece of property, not likely.
But in that scenario, let's keep the costs really low scenario, you could print out your Google Maps, call Blue Stakes, have them do it, and then just go and mark it on your cheap little map, and that's
Yes, you can do
basically
that.
what we're asking for, right?
Oh,
Yeah, that's the cocktail napkin version.
The cocktail napkin version.
Okay,
Thank you.
good, then I'll leave that one.
Are we adding in these like suggestions, like calling Blue Stakes or using whatever that website is or whatever?
On some of these, we've suggested where they can find the information, but
I mean, Blue Stakes is pretty obvious, but I'm saying like you did reference that
I think
engineering
usually.
website. I can't remember what it was. NRCS.
Yeah, like on that one, I think I would. Like, if there's an
Yeah, that
easy, good resource, let's put it in here.
Yeah,
Because
Great.
they're just going to call staff and
Then you're just
we'll
gonna
be
tell them.
handling a lot of phone calls. And so
Yeah.
that was the idea on each of these, like, even with the wetlands, we said, look, the US Fish and Wildlife has inventory maps, or the Utah Department of Natural Resources. So we're trying to help them get there, otherwise we just get the phone calls.
I do think a lot of this is pretty easily found on Google too. Like if you type in these descriptions, you come up with which agencies and where to find that data. So,
And I think maybe, speaking of that, maybe rather than always in the ordinance, we craft the brochure of the ECI so that they have the suggestions of resources and locations
Great.
handed out with the information.
It's a good idea.
I feel like in the same way that we give the utility providers worksheets at our DRC, we can have a list of websites
Oh,
to
yeah,
use too.
that'd be great.
That's a good idea.
That's a great idea. Okay. So the dams and canals,
Scary.
we may have ditches and canals and things like that, but we do want them to show us those, and there are some noticing requirements of canal owners if you're doing a subdivision nearby. So I think that's pretty reasonable. They're gonna know if they have a canal on their property. Then the special protection zones.
Lisa, before you go to that one, because it goes over to the other page, and I thought, sorry, I should have chimed in on this earlier, and then we passed it, and I thought, I'll wait until we get ready to move off of this page. So on steep slopes, the breakdowns that we have, 0 to 10, 10 to 20, so we do have some overlap there. So if you're in 10%, you're in both categories. If you're in 20%, you're in both categories. And 30, this is just my OCD kicking in. Do we want to do 10.1 to 20, or do we care? Does it matter? Does it matter that in the 10, 20, and 30% range that they're having to put it in two places?
How many do you think are going to be exactly 10?
Well, at this stage, does it matter?
Does it matter? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't.
Well, back to the discussion
kind
and
of
whether
guess
somebody's
anyway.
costing some money. I mean,
Ground goes-
I'm capable of taking a topographic map and creating an estimate of what those slopes are, but I would say unless you're an engineer, you're not going to be able to do that information. So what's really important to know is the topography, so that we can, because us looking at the contour lines know what we're dealing with. They're 2-foot contours and they're sitting on each side of the 36 sheet. We know it's running flat. So that one I think could be a good point.
It just, like I said, it's my OCD. I see 10% in two places, and it bugs me that it's only 10% in two places.
I think
And only 20 in
normally
two
I would
places.
agree with you, but again, this is, I don't know that it's gonna be that accurate.
Fair
I
enough.
mean, we're just trying to give big ballpark. And I think in our own ordinances, I guess I should look at our hillside, but we probably mirror that.
I think Shaylin actually has addressed that. I remember
Did we change
didn't
it?
we address that in
Was
Hillside?
that when we amended the,
What's
We
his
might
name?
have.
something for Fred Hale, right?
Yeah, we might have.
Fred Hale or Chad
Yeah,
Morris?
something for him.
It was
Yeah,
Chad Morris.
we did some,
I would look at it. If we do something different somewhere else, then we
Yeah,
should
let
probably
me-
be consistent.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Okay, well, yeah, site slopes of less than, okay, so here's how we did it. Less than 10%, areas between 10 and 20, and areas between 21 and 30. Well, you're missing areas between 20 and 21.
True,
So-
true. Okay, fine.
That wasn't a great fix. Areas between
to
30
say
and 30.
Over
I
20.
don't even know if engineers get that specific on a slope.
Depends on if ADA is required or not.
All right, leave it as it is, Lisa. Let's look at special protection areas.
I mean, we could say more than 10 to 20%, more than 20% to 30%, and over 30%. That would get it.
There we go. I
Okay.
love it.
Do it.
Over or more, something like that, okay. And over, okay, fixed. Okay, so special protection areas, this is just to help them start thinking about their own property as well. And understanding that, hey, we have the hillside overlay zone, double check that. We usually pick up on that, but I think it's good to have them start thinking about what are they in. We do have wellhead protection areas that some properties are in, and, you know, it would be nice to have that as a, let's look at those areas. There's certain things you can't do in the wellhead protection areas.
and that is mapped in the city ordinance, the well protection and groundwater recharge.
Is that on our GIS site?
Yeah, I don't think they've included that on the GIS.
Yeah.
It's Randy's map.
Mhm. And then the cultural or historic resources, like cemeteries and historic districts, and I couldn't really think of anything else under that category. So I think when we were discussing this as the Development Review Committee, we added this geotechnical assessment, and maybe this is something that we move to the preliminary, but you know, we don't really have a hazards ordinance, or I think we just wanted to be clear about when and how we can require these geotechnical assessments with subdivisions. So we did want to add that subsection B that just says, hey, at any point in the process, if we want a geotechnical report, we can ask for one. That's what section B is, and whether it goes here or in general subdivision provisions, I'm fine with that. But then there was also some distinction between a geotechnical assessment versus a report, something like that, which might be something more specific that comes later. But this point, we're just saying we want maps published by the Utah Geologic Survey associated with the property, along with a geotechnical assessment written by a professional engineer. So yeah, do we want that now, or do we want that at preliminary? Given
Preliminary.
this group, I think I'm
it's the
hearing.
same as the wetlands assessment.
Mhm.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Yeah, Mike Lowe at the USGS, when he did a lot of mapping of Davis County, there's a map available with inferred and known faults and landslides on that map. So that's available, but again, it's back to that generalized, it's not going to be,
Is that
property
something we
specific.
want? Do we want them to provide that general information, or do we not care about it at that point?
I mean, you know, I'm torn because I know the scale of that map versus a piece of property is going to be difficult. Even when you use their tool to scale and zoom in, it's not that great. But if you're thinking back up here about the overlay, it's good to have people understand that they might have an inferred fault, because if you look at that map, you can kind of draw potential conclusions. And so it's good to have somebody look at that map, and if they're up on a hillside area or something of that nature, to know what they may be up against.
And it
it's
may
available.
key us off that we do want a geotechnical report
But
later.
much more than that, there's not a lot.
So what would you
without doing an
call
assessment.
that? Shall include relevant reports and maps published by the Utah Geologic Survey.
Yep. I'd leave
Maybe
it at
just
that.
I
period.
think that's okay, just that they, yeah.
I kind of like that. And then we can decide later
The
all of this, put
geotechnical
this in
assessment and
preliminary
reports and conclusions
Right.
happen at preliminary.
Based on that
You're
early
gonna,
information.
you're gonna put the period though after affecting the subject property, right?
No, she's gonna leave it out just for you.
Yeah.
Affecting the subject property. Okay. Well, good. Well, I think when this comes back, you know, I'll take a number of the items out or loosen the language so that this really is just telling us about the red flags, helping the developer understand some key points of things they need to start thinking about, and helping staff have more information up front. I think those are the goals of this.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Appreciate your hard work on this.
All right, well, thanks for all the input.
Who'd have guessed you would have so much input on 3.5 little pages?
That was great.
He loves it.
3 pages. All right. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, number 3, which is to finish discussion of the goals for the Planning Commission. So I will turn the time over to staff.
Great. All right, so I just wanted a quick wrap up on our last work session, and just a reminder that we have a work session with the City Council on March 13th, starting at 5:30. And Corey said that we can push that meeting back to start at 7:30 if we need to, since that might be a
And I think
hefty
we're
one.
all planning to have the 2-hour discussion. So dinner will be provided at 5:30. And we would go to 7:30 for the work session and then start the regular meeting at 7:30, and we'll do the noticing accordingly.
Is that regular meeting gonna be kind of thin? Is that-
It's thin.
Yeah.
Say the date again.
13th of March.
Of March. Okay.
I think
Our
there's,
first meeting in
I
March.
think I show you one item. I think there's actually a second potential to Dual Creek for Davis County on that agenda, so it'll be light.
Yeah, there's like 2 to 3
Okay.
pretty light rooms. So this is from our prior work session, what I heard that your priorities were, based on that list that I gave you, and I just wanted to make sure that I was hearing that correctly, and if there was any kind of prioritization you wanted to add to them, or add anything to that list. So I'll just leave it up to you guys.
I think the list looks great. I think that the first thing that we have to focus on is getting the Main Street overlay done. Given what the city council has given us and the really short timeframes, I don't think we have, I mean, we just don't have enough time to tackle anything else. So I think that first thing, front and center, we need to get through that. And then once we get done with that, then we can turn to other items.
I agree, and I love the calendar, the proposed Main Street calendar, and I think
That
we
is
should,
intense.
I think we should try and stick to that as close as possible. I mean, I'm serious about that. Let's try and stick to that.
No, this is, I mean, it's aggressive. There is
Yeah.
no question. This is an aggressive schedule, so I think that we're gonna have to stay really on top of it to get through it. Is everybody gonna be, I'm flagging April 24th as the commission status work session, the one that they have in red here, because I am not gonna be there for that one.
I'm not
Let
going to
me
be there for
explain
that
to
one
you what
either.
I'm trying to plug and play into there, and I mentioned that to the council in presenting this to them. 2 parts. The first part is I'm trying to plug something in with the council to be informed along the way so that we don't, in my mind, have the same thing happen with the use list. Turn you loose, take 3.5 months, come back, and the world changes. And give, you know, you can argue the good and the bad of that moment, and but that's my first thought pattern. I'm plugging that in there for the 24th of April and the 22nd of May. But what I told the council was, I didn't really want that to be turned into a work session, trying to schedule all the council members. They're all welcome to participate into the process. But I put in a 6 p.m. in that And it was an opportunity that if 2 of them can come, that's great. If all of them come, that's great. But it's intended that we're just bringing you up to speed of where we at and what we've heard. Not so much trying to say, because I really propose to them that this is your role as citizen planners in this process. This is when you go through all the training. This is what you're supposed to be doing. And I wanted an opportunity for them to hear it, so they discuss in the background, and people that they hear about, that they have a full understanding of where we're at and kind of what we're discussing. But I'm not really looking at those work sessions as a convincing them that this is the good direction. I think I'm looking at them saying, here is what we've looked, this is what we've heard, what was drafting, you need to know this information. And really kind of drop those meetings at that. And whether 2 of them come or all of them come is really up to their discretion. I was just trying to tag it that they're always not 3 months later and the picture changes.
I mean, I would encourage any of the city council members all along this process to swing by, drop in, right? Listen to what we're talking about. And so I mean, I like piping in times for them to do that, but I think that the message should be, and not just that, right? You're welcome to come anytime and give us feedback as a member of the public, frankly, as we're doing things. That one I wanted to flag because I know for sure on the 24th I'm out.
I'm out too on that day.
So I want to make sure we have enough other folks here. Any other conflicts? Is that one, are you good?
I'll be here.
Okay, good. Okay.
I'll be here the 24th. I won't be here the 13th of March.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna be out
All
that
right.
day too.
Perfect.
So, just on your goals, my notes indicated that you also wanted to focus on some training, some land use training for the Planning Commission and the City Council this year. And I sent out that email of what the league has to offer. And Kai was able to go to one of these Land Use 101. And I thought maybe he could tell us a little bit about whether that was helpful or not, and if that's something that maybe we could sort of shoot for. I looked at the calendar. They already calendar out these Land Use 101, so they can't add any more. And they said, she didn't really say, she said we couldn't be a site because we have to be USU compatible or something. So we can't be a site, but there's only 2 dates left where we could all go to Kaysville. So that would be May 18th or June 8th if we wanted to say, look, City Council, Planning Commission, Board of Adjustment, let's all drive over to Kaysville on a Saturday for the morning and have some land use training. You know, I think it's helpful to all be there and, you know, be able to talk about it later, but I don't know, maybe Kai, you could help us.
You know, for me, and I'm new, and the 101 signifies that it's for boneheads. And I thought, there were 4 speakers, and I thought all 4 were excellent. And I learned from each one of them. And maybe some of it was too basic for the mature group here, but for me and what I'm trying to understand, I thought every speaker was excellent. I was looking for my notes, and I know I took notes on here, but I can't find them. But anyway, it was a great meeting. It moved along quickly. I'm assuming you have to be in one of their facilities. There were 7 or 8 other sites from St. George to Logan.
So it wasn't actually a city hall, it was a USU site?
It was a USU site, and they had a USU guy Skyping in these 4, 5 or 6 other.
So you sat in a room and watched a TV,
Except,
but it was still exciting.
It was the room that they moderated from.
Okay.
So the speakers were in the West Valleys, the USU West Valley side. But there were people in Logan, there were people in Vernal, there was one person in Moab who was all by himself. And I mean, Logan had a big group, I mean, but yeah, so the 4 people that came in and spoke were here in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
But they did a great job, and there was a lot of interaction between, I mean, questions and comments and experiences being shared, so.
So we are required, I mean, the league recommends that we have land use training for all of our boards and council, but our own insurance company requires us to have the training. So, you know, I think it's helpful. I think, but that was just one question. Do you think it would be helpful to say, hey, let's target either May 18th or June 8th and invite everybody, you know, understanding some may not come, but, you know, maybe we could get a few from each body.
I am going to attend to the next one. I thought it was great. The time went real fast.
Well, and I went to the, I went 3 years ago to Land Use 101 as well, and I think I mentioned in our planning meeting, it would be interesting to go again, even after going, when I had less experience, to be able to go now would be a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
So how frequently we go, I mean, do they say every year, right? So maybe we don't need to do Land Use 101 every year, but maybe we like come together and we do something this year that's Land Use 101, and then we had that other guy come about
Right.
administrative, legislative, we could have them come, you know, like, so maybe you could set up like a schedule where it's like, we do this every year, and this is just part of what we do because it's part of what we have to have for our insurance, and this is our thing, and this is our thing, and this is our thing, or whatever.
I really, really like that idea, and I really like the idea of having the planning commission and the city council do it together. I mean, we should be cooperative. We should be trying to get on the same page so that we can promote and achieve goals and values rather than being loggerheads. I think that that would be really helpful for everybody to do it.
Okay.
May 18th happens to be the Ogden Marathon, so I'm going to advocate for June 8th.
Okay.
I'm unavailable on June 8th, but that's fine.
I'm
I-
unavailable on both
but
of those dates.
I think that it should, well, I mean, pick whatever, you don't have to, I tongue-in-cheek say, obviously, because June 8th works better for my schedule, but I think we should push for whatever date works for the most people.
So we're trying to do two things here, right? We're trying to, one, satisfy our insurance requirement, and two, just give us some better training and deeper understanding of land use and all that other fun stuff. But we don't have to do them both together at the same time, right? Here's what I'm thinking, part of what I'm thinking is for example, for Thomas's benefit, brand new, you know, certainly some basic stuff like administrative versus legislative, unless you're already an expert on that stuff.
No.
Might be very helpful before we get too far down the road. And so I don't know if that's something that we just do kind of like we've done in the past, and then we can say, here's this other thing for your enrichment. I don't know.
Yes, well, I was gonna suggest both. So, you know, some years the planning commission says, hey, you know, Lisa, provide some training on conditional use permits or the legislative administrative, and, you know, we can certainly do those whenever you want. The other thing that the league sent me a list of videos that they have, and I know it's not great, but to, you know, sit here and all watch a video, but they're really good. I mean, they're entertaining. It's going to be more entertaining than me. And I went through, they probably have like 6 to 8 land use ones.
I don't know,
ranging-
Lisa, some of your slides,
They don't have they don't have vacation pictures,
Vacation
so
pictures.
I like the,
Well, those are done.
the underwater, you know, scuba diving ones, snorkeling ones.
Anyway, so they range from like
Moving along.
1
Anyway.
to 2 minutes to 8 minutes to 12 minutes. So like once a month, we could just watch a 5 or 8 minute video and talk about
Yeah.
it. And by the end of the year, we would have watched all of the league's videos.
I hereby
like that.
nominate that you, Lisa, designate
Do
one
it.
video once a month. Let's pick the lightest agenda and let's just do it.
I
Here's
like
one,
it.
top 10 things every planning commissioner needs to know by Megan Ryan.
Ooh,
Meg
that's
Ryan.
not even on my list. Is that a video?
Yeah, these are all videos. I'm on the website right now.
Anybody
They're-
have any objections?
they-
Dear
they're-
City Council, a
they're
message from the
definitely
development
interesting
community
to
to
watch.
local
They
legislators.
showed 2 of those videos in the first session, and they're about 6 minutes long,
Yeah.
and they're entertaining.
But they're so concise, and I mean, they just get it in there, and then we can just talk about it and say, yeah, I agree, or I don't agree, or gosh, I didn't know that.
yeah, I'd say let's put it at the end of a light agenda like this. Nobody's here, so it's not like we're worried why we're watching videos. But
I'll bring the popcorn.
Excellent. I like it.
I like that.
yeah.
Okay, great.
Mismanagement 101, a mock public meeting. Ooh, that one looks interesting.
That looks great.
Wow, well, send me your, you know,
There's
top
lots
10.
of
and
options.
Okay, that's
I like
interesting,
it.
because those are different than what she sent me, but, okay, and then Do you want, should we just pick the June 8th and I'll send an email to all of our public bodies and say, this is mandatory
I don't think
training?
you have to do June 8th. Like, you might want to check and see what works best for people. Like, send out a quick email, see what works best, and then pick whatever date works best for most people.
I don't know if that's a reset.
Or we could offer both. Please
Yeah.
pick one of these.
I like that option.
I like that. Instead
I
of
like
trying to
that
get
option.
everybody the exact same one, we could just offer both. Please sign up for the 18th or the June 8th.
Cassie, I would like to ask you, after we get done doing the Main Street issue, to help us remember to come back to this goals list, because I think that there are some really worthy things on this list. Right now, I really want to focus on getting that piece done.
So in August.
So, in August.
So when we're done with the year.
Yes, sort of. Yes. Like, just help us come back around, because
sure.
I don't want to forget to do those.
Do
those
we
great
really
things.
want to put West Centerville on the back burner that long, though?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think we need to spend all of our available time on Main Street and get that
Okay.
done.
I'm not saying the west side is not important, but
I
I think
understand.
that given the city council's,
I just
you
keep
know,
getting more
marching
and more
orders.
nervous that without a plan on the west side, I don't know.
maybe that'll be the first thing that we tackle in August.
I agree. I don't think it can be put off too long.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's either
Is
no,
there anything we can do that's like a little something to start thinking about or direct staff to do with that, or no?
I think we gotta do Main Street, because we either have no plan on the west side, right, or we have a plan that's stagnant on Main Street.
And then a partial plan on the west
Yeah.
side. Yeah,
Well,
you're
what
right.
if we provide you with a copy of the last proposed West Side General Plan Amendment? And you can, I mean, do you think there's any value in that of where we were proposing to go that was denied?
Well, maybe that'll tangent us, though.
I'd like to see it.
I mean, I
I'd
don't think
like
there's
to
any,
see it.
I don't think there's any harm in circulating it. I mean, at least it gets us thinking about it. So let's slap it in a packet and,
I mean, because I think, although things have changed over the years, I mean, my thinking would be we'd at least go look at that to see, you know, rather than reinventing the wheel, is, okay, some of this didn't fly, maybe the mixed use, but,
I don't think it hurts for us
Yeah.
to relook at it, right, and be thinking about it.
when was that, Corey? Like 2000,
2014,
okay.
I think.
'Cause it was
I think it
before
was-
you.
It was
Wait.
before me,
I think it was right when
It
I
was like
got
Logan,
put on, which was
Gina.
about 5 years ago.
yeah.
I'll try to find that last draft.
Oh, I have it.
You have it? Okay. You want to send that out?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Great.
I thought it was good work, and, you know, at least see where I guess we didn't leave off, but it wasn't successful, but that doesn't mean we bring up the exact same thing. It's just, we look at the ideas that were there and where we could go from there and change it to have it be more palatable, because I think the main opposition was traffic and from, you know, single
Density.
family. From
The densities were
westbound.
over the top for West Bountiful.
Okay, we'll watch for that. Good suggestion. Okay, moving to last item, well, I guess it's fourth item on the agenda. City council report. Corey?
Just gonna make sure I get that agenda up. I keep opening windows and I don't know what I do with them after. So we have the council report, the CM zone use amendments. It should surprise you, they overall denied the changes.
What? I'm shocked.
Yeah.
Shocked.
What?
Does sarcasm come through?
Yeah, what, we scheduled them first before they discussed about the Main Street changes, because I wanted to give them chance in some of their discussion about whether they wanted to make a few amendments. Councilman Ince actually made a motion to pass some, and it died for lack of motion, so turned around and denied all of the uses, but it was with a caveat. You know, I pushed on the council that you'd put a lot of work into it and how the message would be received, and the response pushed back to me was, look, we really feel like we're not ready to make decisions on uses when we don't know the direction that we want to go with the changes. I can appreciate that to some extent. Just to be honest with you, if we don't address change uses in a generalized, maybe we don't have to talk about a specific use. Should veterinary services be there or not? But if we don't talk about uses in a framework, there's no way I can craft regulations. You know, if we're going to, are we keeping just commercial uses? Okay, that's important. Are we addressing existing uses and retrofitting? Are we adding uses and anticipate some tear downs and rebuilds and additions? That's you know, how are we going to address that? Are we adding residential? If we are, how does that relate to the commercial uses? How does that relate to residential development? To what extent? You know, single family obviously will win the day, but are we convinced that everything will be redone in single family? So for me, we have to have a hard discussion about uses in conjunction. Maybe not a specific use, but in general, what are the uses we're comfortable with? And so I'll send out a memo in advance of the work session trying to outline the bullet points and say, if we're going to move forward, these are some of the critical ideas and concepts you need to identify. And it includes uses. Uses is a part of it. You can't say, do some standards and then we'll talk about uses later. That's not going to work. There's nothing I can craft that is going to match anything. And
So luckily, as planning commission, we've taken that and started that little nugget so that you can use that and
you can spin off of that.
spin off of that for planning, for city council to understand that too.
And so uses are, you know, they're trying to say they came too far in advance of the design. Okay, but we can't reverse it. Can't reverse it and do design and then decide uses. So.
I totally disagree with that thought about you can't do the uses without the design, because there are plenty of buildings along Main Street that I think could be repurposed to a new use and wouldn't affect the design at all, right? Like, we're not talking about taking every single building on Main Street, redesigning it enough that we gotta move it to the street and put up all sorts of the other stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff that you could do to allow a use, and the existing design, which is not in compliance, but whatever, is fine. I mean, it's, you know.
No, yeah, it's one way to approach it, absolutely.
Well, and I also think that addressing uses was one of the reasoning that we had for addressing uses was to see how Main Street would react to market and see how the commercial aspect would either fly or not with this increased use list. So I think our intention for doing that was to help utilize Main Street as it could be utilized.
Well, I use the term open door. Remember, council, you said, let's go open the door.
Yes.
I'm not saying that's the right direction, but that was where we.
Open for sale was, I think, open for business.
Open for business, yes.
And so we ran with that concept. So we have to address it, but we'll get to that point on it. So you know the cottages on the corner did receive final approval, and then the joint work session is scheduled the 13th at 5:30. We'll run to 7:30, and then we do have one that I put on the agenda because they had their application in, a pet grooming CUP for the kennel. It takes a kennel use to do the pet grooming, so that would be over by the Big 5 sports area for a conditional use permit. And then I think Dual Creek.
Dual Creek final plat and.
That's the county property.
Maybe one more CUP.
Oh, they have a final plat? That'll be fun.
So we have a meeting scheduled on top of the work session.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Moving right along to last item on our agenda, which is to review the preliminary minutes. Let's see. Do we have two sets of minutes here? I thought I only saw.
Yeah, there are.
Preliminary work session.
Yep, sure enough. All right, let's start with the preliminary meeting minutes. So we're just gonna do these page by page. If you have any, well, let's at least this is how it printed in my packet, so let's make sure we're all on the same page. So we're
And
doing
so I was
the
gonna
one at 7 o'clock, right?
Let you
First?
know, that some minutes were posted that did not include a number of substantial edits.
Uh-oh.
So
Uh-oh.
we pulled those off, and then we put the corrected version, thanks to Jamie noticing over the weekend that the version that was on there didn't have the corrections, so, yeah. What?
That's what I do on
So I didn't have the ability to put them back on, but I just deleted them. So if any of you printed your packet over the weekend, they weren't there, and then on Monday, Mackenzie put the correct version back on. And Jamie, do you remember which ones they were? Was it the work session?
I believe.
Okay.
So
So
if-
it was the,
If I printed my packet this morning, I
it'll be
have the
fine.
right version.
Yes,
Okay, good.
okay. It's just if you printed it on Friday or Saturday.
So
Or
if we printed
Sunday.
it this week, we're good.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, okay.
So my procrastination paid off. Is that what you're
Yes.
telling me, Lisa?
It generally does.
Okay, so we are gonna start with the planning commission meeting minutes, for February 13th at 7 o'clock, the ones that are up on the screen right now. So
Yep.
let's go through these page by page, and then we'll turn to the work session next. So anything on page 1?
Would you put an E on the end of my name?
That's on the work session.
Oh, yeah, you're properly spelled here.
I got that.
But I will.
Hold it, which one did we move to?
The 7 o'clock one, this one.
We went the
Oh,
later
okay,
one
okay,
first.
Right
Sorry,
one.
sorry, sorry.
It's just because of the way it printed in my
Alright,
packet.
alright, okay.
Y'all get to go that way, because
Okay,
it's,
E is
'Cause she's
the,
in charge.
district-
well, because it's stapled together, and I'm, All right, so page 1, page 2, page 3.
I have,
Go ahead.
I have a change on page 3. Line 32, I went back and watched it just to make sure I don't, because obviously Hafoka, the development was a very tender spot for many people. I just want to make sure that I used some exact wording that I had in there, and so I would like it to change to say, Commissioner Wright pointed out that the previous Hafoka development came with some turmoil of trying to figure out what residents were hoping for versus what developers were hoping for. However, if the Planning Commission were to approve the rezone currently under consideration, she did not expect similar concerns because of the lower density level changes in the RM zone, as well as the fact that no one appeared at the public hearing to speak in opposition to this rezone. And then there was another part. She also expressed appreciation for the compromise that was reached between the city and the concerns of residents following the first Hafoka development.
And that second part was where?
Just right after.
Just, it was not existing, but I can send this to you.
I'll watch it on YouTube.
Oh, perfect.
Lisa, did you tell him that we have YouTube? We may not have USU, but we have YouTube here.
I'll let them
No?
know.
That didn't win the day. Sorry, Kevin, did you have an extra?
Yeah, I have a small change on line 38. It reads, Commissioner Daley suggested that as a PUD, there might be a possibility of bonus unit. I am certainly not one to be suggesting bonus units to anybody. So Kevin Daley.
Whatever,
Commissioner
that's what I
Daley-
think about with you. I'm like,
Yeah.
Kevin is like trying to suggest bonus
Yeah,
density all the
that's right.
time.
Commissioner Daley asked, sorry, we're on line 38 of that same page.
I know, and I said.
Commissioner Daley asked if, comma, I guess, as a, and then leave the rest of it alone. So,
Planned unit development.
yeah, planned unit development. So I would just strike suggested that as a, and replace those words with asked if as, or I'll leave the as a, I guess, but strike suggested that and replace it with asked if.
Okay.
Because I was just curious, not trying to guide anybody. Yeah.
Okay, anything else on page 3? Page 4? Page 5? Page 6? The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to accept the minutes of January 23rd.
February 13th.
February, what are we at?
February 13th.
February 13th, 2019, the 7 PM Planning Commission meeting minutes as amended.
I'll second. Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, moving to the work session minutes for February 13th at 5:30.
Jump on that.
All right, we know that we need to add an E to the end of Kai's name. Any other comments on page 1?
You should probably put that I was absent.
Oh,
I must have figured that out already because I've circled your name, so
Okay.
yes.
There we go. Any other comments on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Chair will entertain a motion. Anyone?
Yeah, I got it.
Is
I move that we.
Bueller? Bueller.
I move that we, where did it, the front go, anyway? I move that we adopt the minutes of the Planning Commission work session on February 13th, 2019, as amended.
Second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay? Oh, wait, yeah, I'm an aye, sorry. No nays.
Did you
No
say
nays.
nay?
No nays. I'm just too excited to get to the last motion, which is that since we're down to the end, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.